Welcome classic rock fans to another listing video, but this one's rather positive. Album covers I absolutely love. I'm even wearing my Joni Mitchell t-shirt, which I spent a fortune for online. There you go. I will say, if you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe and check that notification bell, and check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work. Then a classic album review is always much appreciated. Anyway, let's get into it, shall we? Number 10 is Kate Bush and Never Forever from 1980. I absolutely adore this sleeve. This remarkable cover is so enigmatic, and it moves away from the mere photographic conceptualizations that Kate Bush used on those first two albums. This album is far more experimental. Of course, those first two albums are really just a kind of a collection of piano demos she recorded years ago. Absolutely wonderful as they are, though. The cover is drawn by Nick Price, who of course designed the tour program as well for that wonderful tour she did in 1979, I believe it was. Kate Bush said the piece represented all the good and bad coming out of her. From exactly where they're coming out, I'll leave to your imagination, but it certainly draws us into the ethereal strangeness of her world. And if you open the gatefold, of course, you've got all these little hobgoblins mingling with the lyrics on a nice background of lush magnolia. I mean, what more could you ask for? Number 9 is Elvis Presley, the debut album from 1956. This speaks volumes of the energy and vibrancy of the music contained therein, with its kind of pop art feel, really, with that lurid pink and green. And we get that photograph of the jelly-haired fellow in full swivel. It captures a moment rather than just sort of staid portraiture, emphasising the most dangerous aspect of rock and roll, which of course was its suggestive undulations. From the beast that cometh forth from Tupelo, to misquote Nick Cave. The photograph was taken at Fort Homer Hesterly Armory in Tampa, Florida on July the 31st, 1955 by a one William V. Robertson. The photograph was actually taken shortly after he signed to RCA. And he brought with him those whole spate of wonderful recordings he did at Sun Records. That's of course before it all goes a little bit belly up with those dreadful film appearances. This album represents an artist, hungry and fresh and wonderfully represented in the beautiful image we get on the cover of this sleeve. And it's such an iconic sleeve. Of course, the Clash paid tribute to it in 1979. Number 8 is Billy Joel's The Stranger from 1977. Jim Horton takes a wonderful bit of portraiture here with its sort of grey, grainy feel, emphasising the rather murky themes of the masks that we wear, this false identity we all present like the flower, but be the serpent under it. It's a beautifully framed picture with Billy Joel staring at the mask, which of course is certainly a reference to the title track of the album. And of course he has his boxing gloves there, which is an allusion to his pugilist past, I suppose. But he's also barefooted, which is supposed to be a nod to Abbey Road, as is the wonderful epic on this album, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, which is supposed to be a homage to the long piece on side 2 of Abbey Road. This is a wonderful gospel-infused album, these beautiful little character vignettes, which of course, he's been doing that since Piano Man, of course. Number 7 is London Calling by The Clash from 1979. This iconic photograph, in the words of Q Magazine, captures the ultimate rock and roll moment, a total loss of control. I love this sleeve for the same reason I love the Elvis sleeve. It seems to capture the spirit of remarkable spontaneity one associates with rock and roll. Penny Smith, who took the photograph for the album, originally didn't want to use it. She felt it was blurred, out of focus. It was a kind of a throwaway picture. But I think Joe Strummer and designer Ray Lowry, if I've said his name correctly, immediately recognised the potential of such an image with its murky, indefinable quality, which was very emblematic of rock and roll and the punk movement. Of course, with its typeset and graphic design, it's also a nod to those early days of rock and roll and that Elvis sleeve. The front cover, of course, features the Clash bassist Paul Zimmerman smashing his Fender Precision bass against the stage of the New York Palladium on the 20th of September 1979. Number 6 is Rumours and Fleetwood Mac from 1977. What a wonderful sleeve this is. Again, it's a beautiful bit of portraiture, I think, which has Stevie Nicks dressed as Rihanna, dancing around Mick Fleetwood, looking lovingly at his pendulous balls. Rhiannon, of course, was a Welsh witch who was celebrated in song on Fleetwood Mac's previous album. The pendulous bits dangling between Mick Fleetwood's legs were, I think, pull chains he'd pinched from public toilets, feeling that they were somehow lucky. Perhaps not so lucky for the poor sod that needed the flush after Mick Fleetwood had been in there. Nevertheless, they very much form part of his costume or get-up now. Number 5 is Bruce Springsteen and Born to Run from 1975. We get Springsteen with his slung Telecaster over his shoulder, leaning on the shoulder of the big man, Clarence Clemons, of course. It's a beautiful, pure image, uncluttered, unlike the music on the album, of course, with its wall of sound production, with Springsteen and Clemons posing against a white background. It speaks of honesty and openness, and according to Wikipedia, Springsteen and Clemons would try to emulate the pose on stage during that tour, waiting for the audience to twig that's exactly what they were doing. Of course, it's an iconic sleeve that's been parodied by just about everybody, from Cheap Trick to Sesame Street. Number 4 is Sgt. Pepper by the Beatles from 1967. This remarkable collage represents a guidebook to the cultural topography of the decade, with the band sporting military jackets, a popular trope during the psychedelic period. Interestingly, the author Ian Ingalls says it provides a beautiful communion with the avant-garde of yesteryear. I love the framing of this sleeve, and I particularly adore the lampooning of it by Frank Zappa and the Mothers, I think a year later. We see the band sporting facial hair. Of course, this is the beginning of the band's beardy phase. The sleeve, of course, was the design was by Peter Blake and Jan Howarth at a cost of about £3,000, which was a hefty chunk of change in 1967. Apparently EMI stepped in when John Lennon suggested he wanted Adolf Hitler and Jesus Christ on the sleeve, feeling it was perhaps a step too far, especially considering the controversy he'd courted a year or so ago in the States. Nevertheless, this is definitely an intriguing and iconic sleeve. Number 3 is Bob Dylan and Freewheeling from 1963. This beautiful image of Bob Dylan walking down the street with his then girlfriend Susie Rotolo is warm and yet conversely autumnal at the same time. Even the adjective freewheeling suggests a disregard for conventions, and the cover certainly does that. This represents a paradigm shift within the remit of traditional folk. Dylan himself said the art was as important as the music itself. Of course, it was the art that went on to inspire that wonderful Ralph McTell song, West 4th Street and Jones, named after the location, of course. Don Huntstein took the photograph. The photograph was taken near where Dylan and Susie actually had a flat, if I'm not mistaken. This was one of those cultural shudders that challenges what a folk album should be, with many of the compositions actually written by Dylan himself, and a cover that moves away from the staged portraiture that we got on his debut album. Number 2 is Heaven and Hell by Black Sabbath. This is such an irreverent yet poignant image. It's actually inspired by a 1928 photograph of women dressed as angels smoking backstage during a college pageant. The art for this album is by Lynn Curley. I love the back cover as well. Beautiful sort of drawing of the band by Harry Carmine. The front cover is just beautiful in its simplicity, as it's an interesting juxtaposition of what we aspire to and what we actually are. A wonderful representation of the fallen state between the ideal and the actual. This, of course, was when Dio had joined the band and brought with him that wonderful, lush operatic baritone of his. Number 1 is Nevermind by Nirvana from 1991. This very much encapsulates the spirit of the band, I think. With such a potent image of the corruption of innocence. The original idea, Cobain, I think, wanted pictures of women giving birth in a swimming pool, which would have been a little bit too graphic, I think, as well as the water getting a little bit too murky, I guess. The idea of the baby and the fishing hook was also Kurt Cobain's idea, I believe. The original idea was to have meat on the fishing hook, which is just nasty. Then they were going to have a CD on the hook to show a child reaching out for music, which is just way too twee, a bit too Janet and John. Of course, whoever came up with the idea of putting the dollar bill on the fishing hook was just sheer genius, as it represented the end of the 1980s, a decade defined by greed, consumerism, and mustachioed men with tight perms. The photograph was taken at Pasadena Aquatic Centre, which had numerous parents with their mewing infants vying for their 15 minutes of fame. In fact, you look at the baby photograph, you can just detect a handprint where somebody has snatched their hand away just in that moment as the photograph was taken. The baby in question was a 4-month-old Spencer Eldon, who can now boast the most famous wiener in rock history, I guess. He was paid $250 for the image, which is not bad for 4 months old, as you can buy an awful lot of rusks for $250. The back cover is a collage, which includes some Kiss statues and some pictures of some diseased snatchers, if you look closely. Not whilst you're eating a kebab though. So there you have it, that's 10 album covers I absolutely adore. If you've enjoyed this video, please do share it. Please do click like, subscribe, check that notification bell. I think I've said this, haven't I? And do all that stuff anyway, it's always much appreciated. And I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is, as you know, hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.